Hey Brad.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing all right. How goes the grind? Guys getting through it?
Yeah, we're getting through it. Busy admissions time right now with
Okay.
closer looks.
Okay.
So we had our fourth form that came today for closer look. A couple kids coming tomorrow, so was kind of bouncing around for that. But
That's great. Yeah.
yeah,
What are you teaching now?
so I teach our fifth form American literature, and then I also teach our fourth form humanities,
Okay.
which is team taught.
Yeah.
This will be my last year in the classroom, though. I'm actually moving to admissions full time
Okay.
next year.
Yep.
But no, I've enjoyed it.
That's great. Yeah, I had a similar path. We'll just get right into it too if you want.
Sure.
But I had a similar path. Like when I got into schools, I I taught, although I always did a little bit of admissions, and then, I don't know how many years in, like sort of then transitioned full time into admissions, and then I always liked trying to teach a little bit and kept a senior elective history class for a
Nice.
few years, but. Um, yeah, that's great. So what year is this for you now at Portsmouth?
So this is year three
Okay.
for me. Yeah. So when I got here, I was hired on as an English teacher, and then also coaching boys soccer, and then head coach for the boys JV team. Our former coach Zach Capelli, he and I kind of talked, so I ended up serving as an assistant for him the past couple of years, and then when he decided to take a different position, they offered the job to me. So
That's great.
yeah,
I do, we don't know each other that well. I was doing a little bit of research
sure.
into your background. So like, but I think like a lot of prep school coaches, a prep school, right? You went to prep school, went to Hebron.
Yes, correct.
Yep.
Yep.
How many years were
So
you there?
yeah, so I was at Hebron for 3 years, which were great. Played for Jimmy LeBlanc, Casey Fatorik. Yeah, the Fatoriks are now at
Yeah.
Cushing. Yeah, like a lot of kids, I was kind of in that spot of like, okay, is college hockey gonna work? You're kind of talking to a few schools, maybe you feel good about it.
Yeah.
You're starting to talk to junior teams. You start seeing that maybe it's not going to go your way. And so
Yeah.
you got to start making decisions. And, I've always been pretty academically oriented. So, I didn't know if junior hockey was going to necessarily be the right path for me.
Yeah.
And so I decided, all right, I'll just go to school, fine with me. And so I ended up, attending Hobart just as a student, and that was great. And it wasn't until I leave Hobart and I go to work at Culver Academies, which is my first job after Hobart, that I was hired on to do some coaching for the boys hockey program. And I meet Kevin Patrick and Steve
Yes.
Palmer and all these guys, and it's a completely different world. And I kind of fell in love with coaching after that.
Yep.
So I feel pretty indebted to them to be in the position that I am, because I think without them, I don't know if I would be doing this at this level.
Yeah, when I was learning more about you, right, like kind of that path of like you look at like John Cooper, right, in
Yeah,
Tampa Bay, right, like that kind of
sure.
similar path of someone who loved athletics and then yeah, kind of fell into coaching and then fell into coaching hockey and I think it's great. Did I also saw in a little bit of a Google search? Did you run in college?
Yeah, so it's a funny story.
Yeah.
I was really a two sport athlete. At Hebron, I played soccer and hockey.
Yep.
And at the time, we had a very strong soccer program at
Yeah.
Hebron. And, so I'm playing with guys that are, they're going on to play Division One. They're going on to play Division Three. I'm starting to get some Division Three offers to play soccer. And I'm a little bit shocked by this because I never
Yep.
really considered myself a soccer player. And I kind of turned them all down because I think, like most hockey identifying kids, you're like,
I
well, I
was
got to see how
the
the
same
winter
way. Yep.
goes. And so, I kind of regretted it leaving Hebron. And so when I showed up to Hobart, I was like, maybe I'll try out for the soccer team in the spring. This seems like a level where,
Mhm.
I could maybe play. And so I decided, okay, I'll run to stay in shape, do some soccer on the side. I never ended up doing it. I fell into other things and,
Yeah.
other groups of people, but it was fun for a year just to kind of be around a different environment I hadn't been in, and to kind of learn the ins and outs a little bit as a student athlete in
Yeah.
that regard.
And then so pretty quickly after you graduated, were you at Culver?
Yeah, it was the first
Yeah.
job right after.
Same,
So
same with me. I was
yeah,
right
so I was
away.
hired on in their fellowship program. So they do something similar to sort of that Penn
Yeah.
boarding school fellowship program. You're not necessarily getting a master's in anything when you're there, but it is a cohort of kids that come in. We have various responsibilities. We are learning some of the ins and outs of teaching and learning, reading some stuff. And then, if you're lucky enough in your first year, you get hired back on for your second year in the fellowship program. I indicated to them I wanted to stay. And so I was lucky enough to be a full-time faculty member in my third year. But being originally from Maine and my family's still in Maine, I kind of wanted to get back to the East Coast and also be at a school that I thought was more so similar to my own experience as a
Right.
boarding school student.
Well, and from a hockey standpoint, being at Culver is with Kevin Patrick and that group, right? Like you're getting a master's degree in coaching hockey there for sure. Like that
Absolutely.
working with those guys. And so yeah, so then like you said, you came to Portsmouth, work with both the JV and varsity program, and then this year, your first year as the head coach there. But I want to talk a little bit about Portsmouth too, because like I've gotten to know the school. I knew it when I was like working in admissions and then stepped away
Sure.
from it and now doing what I do now. Like I've had a number of kids look at it over the last couple of years, and we've talked about some kids obviously for this upcoming year. But it's another one of those schools that when I bring up Portsmouth, I think oftentimes people maybe don't know it, right? Like, oh, I haven't heard of that, right? When we talk about
Yeah.
prep schools. And then when they start to get into it, learning more about, I think one first and foremost, like the academic expectations and academic curriculum at Portsmouth Abbey are, pretty impressive. Like, so for me,
Absolutely.
it's always explaining to families like, hey, this is a school where you want to make sure that academically you know what you're stepping into because
Yeah.
it has an unbelievable academic reputation.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm definitely biased from teaching in the English and humanities departments here, but it's truly amazing the books that we have our students read.
Yeah.
I've taught the freshmen, I've taught the sophomores, I've taught the juniors, and I've taught everything from Tolstoy to Homer, Shakespeare, Dante, Milton. We're reading Frankenstein right now in one class. We're about to go to Gatsby. We just finished Moby Dick.
Nice.
We read the great books, and I think we're really committed to that. And we're maybe not reading them at the level they might be reading
Right.
them, at the undergraduate level. But I think just that exposure that the kids have to some of those great books and those classical works, and we hear it from students when they come back, all the alumni, right? It doesn't matter if they're at Georgetown or if they're at a NESCAC school, and they always say, wow, this is almost feels like it's easier than when I
Yep.
was when I was at the Abbey, and I think that's really what we want. And so I think we're incredibly, fortunate to have the curriculum that we do, and a lot of that just comes from we are a school steeped in a certain tradition,
Yeah.
and we have our values, and I think that ethos really grounds what we do here, and you can see that in our academic programs as well.
Yeah. And I'm biased in some ways. Like when I talk to families about schools, right? Like we talk a lot about like I think for families understanding hey, there's these range of schools, and I talk about like the difference of small, medium, and large schools. And for me, like a lot of it, in part because my background, where also my kids are at school, right? Like that kind of medium-sized school. And I also often talk about those places that have the like, look, if you're going to be a boarding student, making sure you're at a place where 70 to 75% of the other students or more are going to board. And I often talk about like, I think the great thing about boarding schools is the diversity that these student
Yeah,
bodies have, but making sure that you're in an environment where, the percentage of international students is right around like that 30 to
sure.
35% mark. Because they're, as you and I know, there's some of those schools where like as a domestic hockey player, like, hey, it's 50% boarding and 40% international, and like that's going to be a different experience for you as a domestic boarder. And like
Absolutely.
Portsmouth, in some ways, to me, like the Abbey, as you guys call it, I always call it, but is like
Sure.
that kind of quintessential, like hits all those markers, right? Like
Yes.
350 students, 75% boarding, right around 30% international,
Yeah.
and a shockingly beautiful campus in a great area.
Yeah, our admissions team does such a great job of trying to hit those marks. And, I think our boarding students have such a great relationship with our day students. I mean, we're so lucky to be in the location that we're at. We're
Right.
25 minutes from Newport, for example. We're on the island here. And so, a lot of those boarding students, they make friends with the day students quite quickly and they get to go off campus with them and kind of enjoy some of that stuff. But I think on the other hand, it is not uncommon to see our day students here, until like 8 o'clock at night.
Yep.
Or on the weekends, they're staying even later because they want to be with the boarding students. And I think that's great because, for me, Culver's 100% boarding.
Right.
And so it was a bit of a different place. And so coming here and seeing the day students and I wanted to see how they interacted, I was kind of shocked with just how well they mesh.
Yep.
You wouldn't even know if they were a boarding or a day student because they're just always around.
Right.
And I think that's great.
Well, and a little bit of a different, as you mentioned, like location wise from where you were, and Culver's got a beautiful campus, but that location around it is a little bit different than having access to like Newport and Providence and Boston in the ways that you guys
Absolutely.
do. Yeah. Um,
Absolutely.
and so yeah, so this year stepping into the hockey program. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know I was talking a little bit last year that the transition for you stepping into the head coaching role happened a little bit later last year. Is that right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, this was maybe first week of June. We
I
were
was going to
doing
say that my
faculty
my
meeting.
recollection was like, yeah, I remember June,
Um,
July talking to Zach about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was actually in this classroom, where I teach, and I'm grading final exams. And Chris Milmar, athletic director, he texts me and he just goes, "Hey, if you have any time today, I'd love to talk with you." And I have no idea what it's about. I think it's about, could be about anything, whatever.
It's a
Uh,
typical boarding school text. If you've worked in
yeah,
boarding schools, you know that's the like, hey, we've got this great opportunity for you,
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly. And so I go into his office and he sort of, laid it out for me of, okay, Zach's getting done. We were, do you have any interest in taking over this role? I said yes. And it was, I think a 2-day turnaround.
mhm.
And they were like, I think if you want the job, we'd like for you to do it. And so I stepped into it and yeah, it was kind of like, kind of like a firing hose just coming at you and you're trying to learn, you have some idea of what it's going to be like, but at the same time, you have to kind of experience what it is,
Yeah.
and all the ins and outs. So it was kind of a crash course in learning other departments and learning how things operate at a different level. And, that's been fantastic. One of the things I said after the season was done was, regardless of our record or anything, I really felt like I was, pushing myself in a lot of ways that I hadn't been. And
Yep.
now I just have a much clearer picture and vision for what could be moving forward.
Yeah. Well, and I also mentioned the timing, I think, in some ways, like we'll get into how the season went, but like that's a really challenging situation, right? Like, and I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
for any coach when you're stepping in and you haven't had a chance to go through the admission cycle and talk about the players you're going to have, and you kind of get handed a roster, um,
Yep.
like that is a, I think as someone who did it, like that's a tough situation to try to, not only in your first year, but you're sitting there going like, hey, I don't really know who these
Yeah.
players are. And like, I'm sure some of them are great kids and some of them you were really excited about, but like not necessarily a group that you were responsible for bringing in and shaping your roster. And so like,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, that's not, I guess I preface it like I'm not setting up that, hey, like you got to play and you got to win the games, but like it does make it a little bit of a more challenging situation.
Yeah, I mean, what I ended up doing was I was like, I'm gonna have a Zoom meeting with every kid in the program, plus all the incoming kids, just to try
Yeah,
to learn as much about them as quickly as possible. And they turned out to be great kids, that we had coming in. And so that was fantastic. And they were a younger group, which is exciting for us. But yeah, it was definitely different, when, Zach's kind of handing you kind of the list of kids that he is expecting to be on that roster. You're like, okay, that's what we're going to be going with next
right.
year.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and for you guys, I think this is true of, all of prep hockey and maybe in some ways, looking like you guys have, there are no easy days in that schedule. Like you guys
sure.
play, and I think it's the huge benefit of your location, right? Where
Hmm.
you've got all the ISL schools right there, and there's the great, within that sort of call it Metro Boston area, and you've got St. George's kind of right down the road. But
Yep.
yeah, I mean, there's no easy sort of like walking in and finding easy wins in that group.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a unique schedule. And this is what I tell a lot of players coming in is, we're a part of the whole conference, which in itself is an animal just travel wise.
Hmm.
Because we're going up to Maine 4 times a year to play those schools. And, being in that conference that takes up about 12 games for the regular season. But we've been so fortunate to really bolster that independent side of our schedule where we get to
Right.
play Dexter twice. We play Cushing, Sebs, Thayer, Pomfret, Tabor, St. George's, which is a big kind of rivalry game for us,
Yep.
and I think it takes guys, a little bit of time to sort of see that, on any given week, we're going to be playing a team that's very high in the RPI.
Yeah.
And so, how do we prepare for that mentally? And I think our guys are starting to kind of get that and see, that, yeah, every week is going to be a challenge because we got at least one game on the schedule that we know, we're going in there and we might be the underdog. So,
Yep. Well, and I was just literally before we got on having this conversation with someone of like, I don't know that it's really hard, I think, for kids and parents to understand that, like, just from a pure hockey standpoint to start, like this idea of like you get these kids who are playing like really high level, say like U15 or U16 AAA, and in their minds, well, prep school becomes the next, like that's the next step or the next level. And the reality of like, well, right, but it's really like two or three levels, right? Like you're going
yes.
from U15 or U16 to like arguably the top U19 AAA league in the country and
Yep.
understanding, I talked to Ben Hart from Westminster like last week, and he was saying that like, you know, as he's gotten into it is that idea of like it almost always takes a year, right? Like
Yes.
just for kids to figure out how like the intensity of it, right? They're used to like, well, I play
Mhm.
80 games, right? But like you can afford to lose 25 of those and still have a pretty
Yep.
good season. Like we do not have those chances.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find is, one of the things I picked up at Culver was just habits, practice
Mhm.
habits, game habits, and the way we want them to approach, everything they're doing on the ice. And I find that, with a lot of kids, yeah, it takes more than half the season for them just to start embodying some of those habits and realize, oh, I can't actually do what I was doing last year. It's just not working anymore because I don't have the time and space. Everyone has better stick skills. It really is, a couple levels above
Yeah.
where they were at. So,
Yeah. And also just like I said, the intensity of like, I think sometimes you hear that for lack of like the knock right on prep hockey is like, well, they only play 30 to 35 games, and that like, one that's what college hockey is, right? College
yep.
hockey at your best is going to be, I think it's going to take 42 maybe to win the national championship. Um, yeah, and you can't really afford to have a bad week or a bad day. Like we used to talk about like those holiday tournaments when I was coaching of like your season can unravel in 48 hours, right? Like you can drop
Absolutely.
4 games in 2 days and now you're playing catch up until February. And like that level of intensity for kids is really, really hard.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, even kids that have come to us that have been at programs that have played those, 50, 60 game schedules, I think when January hits, they begin to realize this is a grind, of like the 6 days a week we're on the ice, even if the games are Wednesday, Saturday or Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, it is more than they expected coming in, even if they played a greater volume of games the year before.
Yep.
So absolutely, I agree 100%.
Yeah. And, I've seen this. I've talked to a bunch of coaches about it. I'm curious from your perspective, and I know with some of the guys we've talked about, right? Like I feel like certainly when I was coaching, I started coaching in the early 2000s through like 2014 or 15. Since I've started doing this, feeling like kids are entering prep hockey younger, right? Which I think for you as like now shifting into admissions, I always talk to families a lot about that idea of like, at a place like the Abbey, like, hey, it might be great that you want to wait till you're a repeat 11th grader to go play prep hockey, but like you're not going to get admitted. Right?
Yeah.
Like, from an admission standpoint, the largest entry point, particularly at like these selective and competitive academic institutions like yours, like, hey, ninth grade's probably going to be your best chance to get admitted. Um, I know this is your first year, but being there for three, like starting to see it shift a little bit more towards, that younger group. I know for me, I think about the group of kids I'm working with, like I'm gonna have, three or four freshmen or maybe three true freshmen and maybe one or two reclassified freshmen who are gonna be playing prep hockey next year. Are you seeing that or shading that way too?
Absolutely. And I think, I think part of that, I think there's a couple reasons, especially for our institution. I think, from just the change in the landscape, I think that the league might get a little bit younger as
Yep.
time goes on, just so kids, have a little bit more time to play junior hockey should they want to do that. And I think at a school like ours too, we don't have, a postgraduate program, for
Right.
example. We don't normally bring in a senior for 1 year.
Yep.
Really, we might bring in a handful of reclass 11s. Rather than that, we are really leaning heavier towards, the sophomore year and the freshman year, partly because we want kids on our campus for as long as they can be, and also just to get acclimated to school
Yep.
life. And the academic component takes quite a bit of time. And so, I've seen that already. I think, for me in our program, we're looking a little bit younger as well. Because I want guys that are going to be here for a few years, that
Yep.
want to make an imprint on the program, on the school, that really want to make it theirs.
Yeah.
And maybe not just come in and see it as, well, it's a 1 year landing pad for exposure, and then I can kind of move on. I think the type of kids that we're getting here and we want here are the ones that are like, no, I want the, Portsmouth Abbey to be a certain culture and a certain program. And I think that does require them to sort of be here for a few years.
Well, and I always talk about for kids like the opportunities that, you know, schools where obviously there's an advantage arguably from a coaching standpoint. Like, hey, if we can we can bring in four or five PGs and four or five repeat 11, like we're probably going to be competitive every year.
Yeah,
The challenge for that, I always tell families this is like, right, but like, those programs where if you're going to go in as a ninth or 10th grader, be able to progress through, and maybe you're starting as the 12th forward or the seventh defenseman as a freshman or sophomore, and knowing that, like, okay, next year I'm going to be the seventh forward or the fifth D and move up and not have to worry about being displaced by these older guys. I think there's
absolutely.
a huge advantage to it. And then you've also seen like, I think about teams like St. Mark's,
Hmm.
Rivers, like you're seeing those teams that are building some of those models, you know, having lots of success in terms of the
Absolutely.
way, like the results they're getting out of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's sort of a big piece for me is just wanting to see development in each kid.
Yep.
Not just them as hockey players, obviously them as people as well. But, when I looked at a lot of our kids last year that were young, they were, sophomores or freshmen, and then to see the jump in their point total this year, right?
Yep.
However slight, it's progress,
Yep.
and they're playing the game a different way and they're gaining more confidence. And okay, now your expectations for next year are even more, right? But they have a little bit of that confidence because they've already seen a little bit of that growth.
Yep.
And so that development, I think, is a really important piece for me as a coach, and I think it's also important, as you said, for them as players to sort of see that as they come through.
Yeah. And for you, it'll be fun. I think have shifting into admissions. I love admissions. Obviously, like I always tell people, like hockey or athletics was a part of what I do, but like made my living on the admissions end of it.
Sure.
Where what's the composition of your roster look like? Has it been like I think it's been really interesting for me. I know the clients I'm working with now are literally from all over the United States. Are you starting to see more and more kids from outside of the Northeast and out of those traditional markets on your team?
Yeah, I would even say it's actually maybe shifted back to the more traditional markets. When I
Yeah, okay.
got here, our team was really composed, I would say, heavily of kids from Quebec,
Okay.
and
Yep.
kids from Montreal, and we also had a contingency from California.
Interesting.
Now we don't have as many kids from California, but we kind of dipped into the Florida market a little bit more.
Yep.
And so we have some Florida kids on our team.
Yep.
And I think, this year, especially, we had less Quebec kids. We graduated we graduated about 6 or 7 of them last year, and they made up a big part of our roster. And so now, as I kind of look forward, it's a much different look. It's more Mass, Connecticut, New Jersey, Florida, California, a few kids from Quebec, a little bit more diverse and distributed across these different markets. But yeah, I think for a school like us, we're always sort of looking out of market because we know we're in, competition with some other schools. So we've been fortunate to kind of dip into some of the non-traditional areas
Yeah.
and find some of those kids for sure.
Well, and again, like, we talked about before, I think as a coach, right, maybe this is somewhat of a like it's a hurdle and there's a little bit maybe some luxury in that idea of like, you know, you don't have the freedom to just go and get like, hey, this is a great hockey player. I want to bring him in, right? Like I talk to
Yeah,
families all the time about you know, I've recently started using the analogy for families and understanding this prep school admission process of like, it's not like college hockey at all, right? Where
yeah,
coaches just go out and like tab a guy and commit him. Maybe it's much closer to like pro hockey where like, hey, there's a coach, but then like the director of admission is going to be your general manager who's actually going to
sure.
decide like who's coming in here and is going to make financial decisions around financial aid and things like that. Um,
Absolutely.
so for you knowing the academic profile that's going to be successful at the Abbey, yeah, I guess maybe describe what that looks like a little bit. Like what is the player you're kind of looking for? Because I know hockey is going to have to come as the second part of that conversation of like, can they do the work here first, right?
Absolutely. And in some ways it might be third at times. I think what I tell a lot of families that come into admissions is, for me, the number one thing is character,
Yep.
right? If they have, outstanding character, they work hard, they want to be here, they want to listen, they want to grow, develop, they're going to be fine regardless of the academic component because they're going to already have that sort of, toolbox of skills to do the work. Second, though, is academics. And I think it is important for players who come here to realize that it is going to be quite challenging. And you are going to be reading books of a certain quality and level that you probably haven't been reading
Right.
wherever you're coming from.
Yep.
And so you kind of have to prepare for that and understand that, yeah, it might take you an hour and a half to do your English homework at night. And that's sort of an expectation across the board.
Yep.
We do have the resources that help scaffold for these students that, may find that overwhelming. And I think they do a very good job of kind of adapting to it. But that academic piece is extremely important because you can't really come to a place like this and decide, well, I'll kind of work hard here and maybe not work so hard here. You kind of have to put your everything into all of the subjects.
Right.
And then it's sort of that hockey piece last,
Yep.
because I think it just follows from one and two. If you
Yep.
have that character that we're looking for, I know you're going to work hard in the classroom and pay attention and do all that kind of stuff. Well, those are the same exact habits that I'm
Yep.
expecting to see on the ice. And I use that analogy with my players all the time of, being on the ice during a practice is no different than being in the classroom. If we're, doing a half ice small area game and I stop the drill because I want to point out something to you, I'm expecting everyone who's not in the drill to be paying
Great. Yeah.
attention.
Yep.
Just like if you were in a classroom and your teacher is saying something to you. So I think it's, having those types of student athletes who are capable of grasping that quickly. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of that does come from their character when they walk in the door.
Well, and the academic piece you mentioned, which I was going to bring up, which I also think is really unique, is I know talking to your admissions office and Brendan and the folks that work in there that um, obviously there is this expectation around like, hey, you've got to be able to, you have to, in the admissions process, demonstrated that you're going to be able to find academic success there,
Yes.
right? But yeah, I do think I've always been really impressed by, in some ways, there's a range of student that I think I've seen get admitted and find success at the Abbey, who are, some of them are those, I always say that like there's some kids who you always know are going to be successful academically because they've been successful academically everywhere they've ever been.
Yeah.
There's some other kids who maybe haven't had that same level of success because they're in a school where the class, like too many kids are in the classroom or wherever it
Mhm.
is. And I've always kind of admired the fact that, like in my conversations with your admissions office, that feeling of, hey, if we feel like this student, he or she can find success here, while our expectations are high, we have the support and we can support of what maybe initially to some families like is a broader range of student than they may initially think. And I mention that because I've
Yeah.
had the conversation a couple of times over the course of the last couple of years where families where I've put Portsmouth Abbey on their list and they've come back and said like, well, geez, that looks like I don't like, is that going to be
Yeah.
over his head? And helping them understand that, like, well, the admission office is going to make that decision, but if they admit him, they're doing so with the confidence that they can find success there.
Absolutely. And I think, yes, the curriculum is daunting for sure. And I think it can be quite intimidating for, students or families outside of the walls, when they're kind of looking in and they see all these books and they see everything else. But it is the case that we have a range of students here. And we have our high flyers. We have the
Mhm.
ones that, they can read the book and they can make sense of it and
Right.
they make meaning. Fantastic. We also have the other ones that they do require a little bit more scaffolding. Um, but they work hard and they pay attention and they listen and they do the work outside the classroom. And, here we have conference periods 3 times a week throughout the academic day where it's essentially just office hours, like out of college, where teachers are just in their classroom and students can come in, they can ask questions, they can go over, a math problem, right? Or, a concept in science that they don't get. And that's what the faculty is here for.
Yep.
We want them to utilize, all of the resources at their disposal. A lot of kids take advantage of that. And it's the same thing, I think, in our houses as well. I reside as an assistant house parent in one of our upper form boys' dorms. And I'm always shocked at how many students I have that I don't even teach them in English, but they're writing an essay
Right.
for a
Coming
different
for support.
class and
Yep.
I'm on duty and they're seeking out my help. Hey, can you look at my thesis? Can you look at my introduction? And I think every faculty member on this campus is more than happy to take that time, right, to help a student with that. And so, even though the curriculum is daunting, we do have that range of students, and they all find a certain level of success given their starting point. And I think once they're here for a year, they can really adapt and adjust, and they learn how to kind of do that work, and they see that development over time.
Yeah. I guess my tying that, I guess, set of questions in, right? Like to me, the Abbey has always been that place that I've talked about with families of, you know, I think one, amazing academic opportunities, beautiful facilities in a great location, but both academically and I think from a hockey standpoint, you know, for those for younger students, right, like ninth or 10th graders who may be at some other programs, like, hey, you're not going to get an opportunity here until you're a repeat 11th grader. Like, you know, your program may be able to provide it, but then also academically, like, hey, we have the I don't love the word rigor, but I don't have a better one, right? Like rigor
Sure.
and reputation that you might see or find at some of the bigger schools that we could rattle off there, right? Some of those
Yep.
names. But we're a place that also can provide a level of support for a student to kind of grow into it that's a little bit different. And so for me, those, it has been really interesting. I've seen that in the last couple of years, both academically and from a hockey standpoint. I've had those, you know, really high level, you name it, super high flyer hockey players off whatever AAA team that's got the highest my hockey rankings who are
Sure.
looking at are going to look at the Abbey, and then also some kids who like, hey, you may need a little bit more time to develop to grow into it. And academically, I feel like there's some of those options and opportunities too.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, I always find this funny. I was just talking to one of my players the other day, and I'm always shocked too by, because of the way our curriculum is set up, and we have, this English class, these English classes, humanities, history, theology, what they end up clinging on to over time too is
Mhm.
something that they actually might not have expected. I was with a player and he was, filling out a form and the favorite subject came up and I was thinking in my head, I don't know what he's going to pick. I have no idea. And he was like, actually, I think I really like theology,
Yeah.
which I didn't actually expect. And I think it's just a product of him having been here since he was a freshman, of being just exposed to all of these things. And he's a bright student to begin with, but just seeing that development over time and the development of different interests that we have to offer, I think we are that type of place that can offer that to students.
Yeah. Speaking of development, the other big question I get now is like the fall hockey piece, right? Like
Sure.
lots of parents, and I think now there's all of these different options you're seeing schools do from like, one, like what are the opportunities to skate on campus from a development standpoint, but then also split season, fall prep leagues or whatever it is. So what was the model you guys used this year and what do you think what's it going to look like for you next year?
Sure. So we participate in the Peak Performance Prep Hockey League,
Yep.
run by Chris Jones. And so, when I get the list of all the students that are coming in, I set a roster, send them the link. They end up playing all their games on Sundays because we have Saturday classes.
Yep.
So, we play under a name, Team White, Team
Right.
Red, Team Crimson, whatever. And
That league
fortunately,
has a lot of great school. Like I mean, more and more teams and
absolutely.
schools in that league right now.
Yeah, Hotchkiss participates, Pomfret does, Berwick was in it this past year, a few others.
Millbrook, I think,
And
right? They're
so
doing
there's a fee for transportation. A charter bus comes, picks them up by the rink on Sundays. Usually I go with them. And it's great. We have Division III college coaches behind the bench. For the past couple of years, we had Alex Gasick, the Nichols coach, which is also great for us coaches just to have
Yeah.
that sort of connections with them and talk about what they're seeing, what I'm seeing, and then great for our players to start kind of developing relationships with coaches at a higher level. So we do participate in that league. We also, when they get to school this year, what we did was starting the second week. I wanted to make more of a focal point on strength and conditioning.
Yep.
And so, I developed this plan, and we basically started that second week of school Monday, Thursday nights in the gym, sort of after dinner.
Yep.
All the guys were there, everyone in the hockey program. And we did that all the way up until the season. And then our ice gets put down late September. So
Okay,
first week of
great.
October, we start getting on the ice Tuesday nights.
Yep.
So for some kids, that's, in the gym Monday, ice Tuesday, gym Thursday, game Sunday,
Yep.
all the way up from Labor Day, pretty much all the way up till November start of the season.
Yep.
And our model will look pretty similar next year, probably with just the incorporation of more in-season strength and conditioning. And we also do have some guys that have a lot of interest in playing peak and then also playing split season as well, because we do have some local kids that are capable of bringing guys places. And I think a lot of them also want that opportunity to play in the spring
Right.
when the season ends.
Yep.
So that's great as well.
Yep. Yeah, I was going to say with in your location, right, the availability to get to, but the
Yes,
opportunities with some really good split season programs, I would
absolutely.
imagine are also there for you guys.
Definitely.
So yeah, talk a little bit about, I guess, yeah, how this season went, and then next year, looking through your roster, I think it looks like there's some opportunity, but how you're feeling about the outlook on your group.
Yeah, I mean, I think coming into this year, losing about 12 guys, we knew we were going to take a little bit of a dip,
Mhm.
right? I think at least from, coaching perspective and athletics perspective, we knew it might be a little bit of a dip and having some guys that were jumping into roles and had to fill some shoes that maybe they weren't ready for yet,
Yeah,
to actually do that. And, you know, we had some real big highs from this last season.
yeah,
A great win against Sebs, a great win against St. George's. I think those were probably the two highlights most of the guys would point out. And then a couple, close losses. I remember at the St. George's Jamboree, we were 2-2 with Dexter with under 10 minutes left in the third. And we were feeling real good about ourselves and, the way we were playing. A lot of it was just that consistency over time and being
depth and
able to
age,
stay
right? Yeah,
consistent. And being a young group, I think it took them quite a long time to figure out what does that mean. Now, looking ahead to next year, I feel pretty good about it. We're gonna have our starting goalie, our backup goalie. They're both returning. Five of our top six forwards will be back. I would say, three of our top four D will be back.
yeah,
So we feel really good about that. And I also feel good that we're still going to be somewhat young,
Yeah.
even next year, so out of those five of our top six forwards, for example, only two of them are seniors.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're in a really good spot to start. I think we have been since maybe around COVID. It feels like, we've been trending in that direction we really want to go into. And, even with this year, we knew that was going to be a bit of a hiccup, but I think next year we can kind of get back on that trajectory where we want to be. So I feel pretty optimistic about it. And I think most of our guys feel really good about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, when I coached at Berkshire for a long time, which I think in a lot of ways is a really similar place, right? When I think about the
Mhm.
academic profile and hockey wise, and I
Sure.
know for us that like we almost tried to think of things in like 3 year segments, right? Even
Yep.
that idea of like, look, because we weren't going to have the luxury of either academically or just in terms of size, like we weren't going to have the luxury of bringing in a ton of older guys and reload every year when I was there, right? So it was that
Yep.
idea of like, hey, if we could get a good group of younger guys, freshman and sophomore, and we're going to take our lumps in year one, and then we're going to
Yep.
get kind of make some good progress in year two, and then that group in their third year, hopefully we're going to hit some real highs and build a little bit
Absolutely.
off that momentum. But then we've kind of got to go through this cycle again, right? And I see
Sure.
like um, I think about Hotchkiss, right? Like I know talking to Mike Doyle, right? Like
Yep.
that progression that they've gone through and some other teams where, you know, I always say that there's a few schools out there that we could rattle off, right? That because of their academic profile and their hockey programs and the depth of it and maybe the historic nature and where it fits into their
Yeah.
school culture that like you can count on year over year they're going to win 20 games, right? Like
Sure.
there's only like four or five of those, right? And
Yeah.
for a lot of other schools it is that like, you know, hey, we've got to find the right kids. They got to be admissible. They've got to be able to do the work. And that means in some cases, yeah, as you said, like we're going to put some younger kids into situations that they're going to be over their head here, at least in their first year, hockey wise. But from a development standpoint, like I think that's what
Yeah.
you want, right? Like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that was a big thing for me coming in was, just based on our institution and the way our admissions process works, not wanting to be back in a situation where we're going to lose 12 guys in a single year,
right.
but to kind of have maybe a little bit more distribution across the grade levels each year and maybe only lose six or seven on a yearly basis. And
Yep.
yeah, maybe the guys that we replace them with are younger guys, but I think seeing that development and also, having our returners understand that they're also developing and they're the guys that are stepping into those, new shoes as veteran leaders. I have a couple of really great stories of a couple of our kids this year where, I had he was a freshman last year, and he was not even rostered for every game.
Yep.
And spent a lot of time in the gym this summer, got on the ice quite a bit. He comes in this year and it just seemed like his confidence was a little different. He had a little bit, he was holding on to pucks a little longer. He was
Yeah.
trying to make plays, he was shooting the puck. And, he's finding himself on that third line. And then he has, one game where he finally picks up his first couple of goals in his Abbey career. And it was like he just takes off
Okay.
from
Yeah.
there and he lands as a center on our first line as a sophomore by the
Yep.
end of the season. And I think now I'm extremely excited to see what this kid can do next year and then know that we got him for another year after that.
Yeah.
So I think, that development and seeing those players, I think is special. And I think, how I want our program to look on a year by year basis that we see those guys taking those jumps. Um,
Yeah. And I think as we talked about earlier, it's so hard. And I think, parents and kids don't often understand that idea of like that year of transition to go from, I think, in that young man, maybe not a whole season, but it's going to take you time to get out of this mindset of playing not to make mistakes
yes,
to getting to like, hey, feeling confident enough that you can go out there and make plays, right? And like
absolutely.
those are two really different worlds and what that can mean. But like, yeah, I'm continually, I think, trying to fight the good fight with the families I'm working with or talking to around that idea of like, hey, it's going to be a process and like just focus on getting better. And, I say this all the time. And again, I just had this conversation with a family of like, look, the league is good enough that if you're good in that league, you're going to have every option and opportunity you want, right? And like
Definitely.
just focus on keep getting better. Um,
Yes,
but
absolutely.
yeah. Um, so I think the other one is I think about questions I sometimes get about Portsmouth Abbey, talking a little bit about obviously you're a Catholic school. Um,
Yes.
I think of, when I think about New England prep schools and Catholic schools that have really strong hockey programs, you and Canterbury, right? I'm trying to,
Yep.
and yep, and I don't know that I think of, I can't think of another one.
I think
But yeah, I
Seb
think,
says that
oh,
Catholic element as well. Yep.
non-boarding, right?
Non-boarding though,
Yeah, I was
yes.
thinking about, yeah, sort of boarding schools. But yeah, you're right. So, um, yeah, I think I get that question. So, I give you an opportunity just to talk a little bit about how both for Catholic and non-Catholic students that, what does that mean to be in a Catholic school?
Yeah, so we're very unique in that we are a Benedictine Catholic boarding school. So we do have a monastery on campus. We have monks that are constantly around. Some of them teach classes.
Mhm.
A lot of them are kind of involved in student life. I think the pitch that I often make is you don't need to be Catholic to come here. We have faculty members who are not Catholic. I think what it does for us, which is very important though, is it gives us our values and our
Mhm.
virtues and our ethos and the way in which we want to, I guess, educate students and also cultivate a certain sense of moral formation in them
Yep.
throughout their time here. And so I like to think about it in terms of like, if you're in the classroom and you're reading a book, you might be focusing on, what are a character's motivations and why are they making the choices that they do? And could they have made another choice? And you can kind of see that it's always sort of linking back to those cardinal virtues.
Yep.
Now, there is the aspect of school life where, yes, we have mass every Sunday morning if you're a boarding student. There are house masses, once a season. This week is a big week for us, it being Holy Week. So there's a
Right.
lot of programming around Easter. There's usually a lot of programming around Christmas. But I would say what I love about it is that even if a student comes here and they're not particularly religious or they're not Catholic, they get exposed to not only Christianity and Catholicism, but throughout their time, they're going to get exposed to the other religions as well.
Mhm.
And so they just become a better rounded person at the end of the day, because I think it's in our senior year theology where they take world religions. So they learn about Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism. And so they just get that exposure to it. So it's not, you don't have to be Catholic. We're certainly not going to push students to
Right.
be Catholic or anything like that. Every year we do have quite a few that go through confirmation class and get confirmed, and that's a great ceremony that we have. But I like to think about it more in terms of, what are our values as an institution? What is the ethos that we want to embody and live through? Not just when we're in the church, but when we're in the classroom, in the dorm, on the athletic fields. And I think that really permeates throughout all of what we do here, which I think is special about this place, even if it can be kind of intimidating to, see a monk in their habit for the first time, and you're not, you haven't been
Yeah.
exposed to that.
Yeah, well, I think about, the way in which you're talking about it reminds me in some ways of like, drawing back to where you were previously, how Culver talks about like the military aspect of who they are,
Absolutely.
right? Like, and that, for them, it's the idea of leadership and community and things like that. It's not about trying to necessarily create soldiers, right? Or that idea of it,
Yes.
right? And I think for you, it sounds it's about ethics or morality and being a part of a community and understanding what that means, not necessarily about being, Catholic or community or those kind of things that are you know, dogma, for lack of a better term, right? Like the
Absolutely.
dogmatic approach to it as opposed to the values instilled in it. But yeah, I do
Definitely.
think it's interesting. As you were sitting there, I was flashing back to my conversation with Kevin and him talking
Sure.
about, what it means to be a military school and how they don't really, that's not how they want to define themselves, right?
Yes.
It's a part of what we are, but it's not who we are, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. For them, yeah, absolutely. It's that leadership and that character component.
Yeah.
And I felt that a lot when I was there. So I felt like that analogy was pretty clear to me when I got here with the
Yeah.
way that I felt like we wanted that to, wanted that to look. Our mission is front and center. We want students to grow in knowledge and grace. That's our mission. And to me, that means more than just, well, we want our students to be Christian or Catholic. It's no, we want our students to go through this, cultivation of moral formation throughout their time here, and that they leave here a better person than when they walk through the door. And I think that's as important to us as it is that then they can read, a
Right.
close passage of Moby Dick and dissect it for us. We want them to be great people
Yeah.
when they walk out of here. And I think those values really help set that foundation for us.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I always say, I think I mean this as the biggest compliment, but in some ways, having worked in schools and admissions, right, it doesn't always sound that way of like, you know, the Abbey is to me like this interesting kind of like, like maybe in the hockey world a little bit too, right? This hidden gem, right? Like this
Mhm.
place that I think about of like, there are in what I do with families, I talk a lot about comparables, right? Like there's
Sure.
family will always come to me and say like, oh, we've heard of Exeter or we've heard of Choate or we've heard of St. Mark's or we've heard of Berkshire, right? And for me, it is always about that idea of like, great, let me tell you, in addition to those, there's these handful of other schools that if you want that, this is a place that can provide a lot of that same experience that maybe from a hockey standpoint can provide you with some different opportunities that you might not get there. And to me, I really do think about for those students I have who are going to be drawn towards those kind of medium-sized schools, right? Again, I mentioned Berkshire, St. Mark's, Westminster, St. George's, like that grouping
Yep.
of schools that have that kind of academic reputation. Um, but I think, yeah, as you said, I think with now you being there and taking over and an opportunity to help kind of, yeah, catch it on an upswing, right? Like the
Absolutely.
opportunities that that's going to create, like, um, yeah, it is a place that I've continued to talk more and more about over these last couple of years.
Yeah, and it's funny. We have kids that walk through the door, and some of them come to us just from word of mouth, or
Right.
whatever it is. And a lot of times, that is what I get from parents is, yeah, like we'd heard of St. George's. We hadn't necessarily heard of
Yep.
Portsmouth Abbey, but we were around, and then they get here and they see the campus and the water and all these things, and
Yeah.
they kind of fall in love with it in a way. And I think part of that too is I'm not too naive on the history of our program and what it has been in the past and where we want to go. And so having some of that success we've had in the past few years is definitely helping us. But I think you're right. I think we're in this really unique position where we offer a lot of what other places offer. We offer our own version of it in
Yeah.
some ways. And then we also offer, maybe a different experience from the hockey program standpoint, and being able to come in as a younger player and, get some playing time early on and really grow throughout your time here, instead of sort of waiting until you're a little bit older and trying to land at, one of what, we might say are more of the brand name type schools that, traditionally do well.
Well, I think about like, that analogy you mentioned, like, I think about where St. George's hockey program was, you know, 10, maybe even 8 years ago, right? And
Mhm.
that similar transition, or when I got to Berkshire, like let's say we were not a place that like, you know, hockey players was not a priority. And so like I do, I have that sense and I think the components that you guys offer in terms of, as you say, like I think all of these are great schools and what you guys can offer academically. Talking to the audience now, I think for those families that are going to get out there and get a chance to see your campus, like it's shocking, right? Like to
Yeah,
be on the water and also so unique to have the accessibility to Newport and Providence and Boston. But yeah, I mean
absolutely.
the opportunity for hockey players there right now is a great one.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't
Um,
agree more.
awesome. Is there anything important that we missed? I think we did a pretty good job.
No, I don't think so. I just want to say thank you for having me on. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
No, great. We'll talk again soon. I know we got some candidates we're going to talk about here over the next couple of days, but yeah, thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brad.
Alrighty, awesome.